A man is nailing boards together on the Brooklyn Bridge. He has a deed in his coat pocket, signed, sealed, notarized. He believes completely that the bridge belongs to him now. Two officers are already walking toward him. They've done this before. Twice this week, actually. By the time anyone learned the name of the man who sold it to him, he'd already sold it again. For the better part of 40 years, one man convinced tourists, newlyweds, and newly arrived immigrants that America's most famous bridge could simply be bought. No permit required, no government involved, except, of course, the government he claimed to be. Most of the time, he called himself George C. Parker. He was born John McCarthy in New York City in 1860 to Irish immigrant parents. He finished high school, more schooling than most street con men of his era ever got, and within a few years of graduating, he'd stopped looking for honest work entirely. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't hurried. He built his first cons slowly, over decades. The way a man builds a business he intends to keep. And keep it he did. By 1885, he had already sold the Brooklyn Bridge once to a tourist from Indiana for $1,000 cash and a note for $4,000 more. It would not be the last time. Parker never thought his victims were fools. Quite the opposite. A detective who investigated him later said Parker preferred marks who considered themselves too clever to be conned. Men certain they'd just spotted the deal of a lifetime. The easiest man to fool, Parker seemed to believe, was the one who was sure he couldn't be. He dressed the part without exception. Sharp suits, soft, unhurried speech. The bearing of a man who had never once needed to lie. And he never opened with the bridge itself. That came later, once the trap was already closing. He'd offer the mark a job first, a well-paid position collecting tolls, right there on the bridge. Once the man had said yes, grateful for the opportunity, Parker would lean in and confide that the bridge had become a burden to him. The paperwork, the endless dealings with the city. If he could just find one honest man to take it off his hands. By then, the victim wasn't being sold anything. He believed he'd talked Parker into it. The paperwork helped. Forged deeds, notary seals, engineering surveys, letterhead lifted from real municipal offices, printed to order, and convincing enough that Parker rented temporary sales offices near the bridge itself, staffed with accomplices playing lawyers and clerks. For his wealthier targets, especially immigrants stepping off the boat at Ellis Island with real savings and no idea how American property law worked, he paid off ferrymen and ship's crew to point him toward anyone who looked cash-rich and unfamiliar with the rules. The bridge wasn't his only listing. Over the years, he also sold plots inside City Hall Park. $25,000 from a group of out-of-state investors in 1911 alone. He posed as the personal grandson of General Ulysses S. Grant to solicit funds for finishing Grant's tomb. At various points, he claimed to represent Madison Square Garden and the Statue of Liberty. The bridge was simply his best-known address. The law caught up with him more than once along the way. It never held. A grand larceny conviction in 1901 cost him 2.5 years at Sing Sing, his first real taste of the inside of a cell. It didn't slow him down. By 1908, he was under arrest again, and on New Year's Day, he simply walked out of the Raymond Street jail wearing the hat and coat the sheriff himself had left hanging by the door. Nobody stopped him. Nobody even looked twice. A man in a sheriff's coat, after all, looked exactly like a man who belonged there. One story, retold for years by the detectives who chased him, captures the nerve of the man better than any court record could. A former victim once passed Parker on the street and failed to recognize him. Parker, by several accounts, recognized the man instantly, and, in substance, is said to have leaned in and told him to leave his card, in case they might do business together again someday. Here's the part that made it work. The Brooklyn Bridge, when it opened in 1883, genuinely did charge a toll. A pedestrian paid 1 cent to cross. A man on horseback paid 5. A horse and wagon? 10. Even livestock had a rate. A nickel a head for cattle, 2 cents for sheep and pigs. Tens of thousands of people crossed every day, and anyone standing at the railing could watch the money come in. To a new immigrant, unfamiliar with what government owned and what it didn't, a privately operated toll bridge wasn't a strange idea. It was simply how the city seemed to work. So Parker didn't need to invent plausibility. He only needed to point at something real and hand the mark a piece of paper that said it was his. The rest happened without him. Once the deed changed hands, the new owner would head straight to the bridge, with lumber, with rope, with handwritten signs, and start building his own toll booth on public property. What none of these buyers knew was how many men just like them were doing the exact same thing, on the exact same bridge. Some weeks, twice over. The New York Police Department became very familiar with the routine. Officers would find a bewildered out-of-towner hammering together a barricade, haul him in, and listen as he produced a legal-looking deed with Parker's forged signature on it. That was usually the first moment the man understood he'd been robbed. The complaints piled up fast enough that Ellis Island's immigration officials started handing new arrivals a printed warning card in English, German, and Italian. You cannot buy public buildings, streets, and bridges from private individuals. Between the warning cards and the tightening police presence on the bridge itself, the bridge sales dried up by the mid-1920s. Parker didn't retire. He simply moved into fake real estate. Vacant lots that didn't exist, sold with the same forged confidence. The ending, when it came, arrived faster than the rise ever had, and it had nothing to do with the bridge at all. In July of 1928, police found a 68-year-old man in the backyard of a house in Asbury Park, New Jersey, measuring the property with a tape measure. He was in the middle of selling fake Brooklyn lots to a man named Max Schmeyer for $17,000. What actually got him arrested was smaller, much smaller. A bounced check written for $150. Once he was in custody, his record caught up with him all at once. Grand larceny in 1901, grand larceny again in 1911, forgery in 1917, the year he also tried to carve his way out of a Dannemora cell wall with a sharpened piece of wood, and failed. Theft in 1923. Under New York's newly passed habitual offender law, the Bonds Law, built specifically to end the careers of repeat felons, a fourth felony conviction meant automatic life imprisonment. Parker's, by the court's own count, was at least his fourth. By the Fuller record, it may have been his sixth. It no longer mattered which number was correct. On December 17, 1928, in a Kings County courtroom, Judge Alonzo G. McLaughlin sentenced him to life. The man before the bench barely resembled his old photographs. Thinning hair, wired glasses, a stooped frame that had nothing left of the tailored confidence he'd once worn like a uniform. 3 days later, he was delivered to Sing Sing. He never left. Inside, Parker became something close to a celebrity. Guards and younger inmates gathered outside his cell in the evenings to hear him tell the old stories. How he'd sold the bridge, who'd fallen for it, how far a forged seal and a good suit could carry a man in a city that wanted to believe. He caused no trouble. He was, by every account, a model prisoner, and the institution treated him accordingly. He died there on January 9th, 1937, at the age of 76, though a number of older accounts still list his death a year earlier, a discrepancy that has never been fully resolved. He is buried in the prison cemetery. By police estimate, his decades of forged deeds and false titles brought in something in the neighborhood of $1 million, worth perhaps $25 to $30 million today. he lost his freedom over 150. A Detroit newspaper writing about his arrest back in 1928 put it about as well as anyone has. Con men, the editorial suggested, in substance, exist to teach people that there's no such thing as easy money. And as long as people keep wanting to believe otherwise, someone will always be standing there, ready to sell them a bridge. What outlasted the money, and outlasted Parker himself, was a sentence that entered the language. Say it to anyone, anywhere, and they'll know exactly what you mean. If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you.